Oh, we have participants joining in. We will give another 2 more minutes time and then start exactly at 10:35 a.m.
Sure, Maria. All right, guys. Good morning. Abhishek, and I'm the part of Telepresence Solution Group. Welcome to the day two of CMS training. So today we touch upon the platform that are required to install CMS. We talked about CMS certificates. We talked about the CMS integration with CUCM, VCS, and the dial plans that we need on the CMS to route calls. We discussed, which is a very important and a valid point when you're moving from 2.x version to 3.0 and what all things we should consider. And we talked about the new features that are in 3.0 and 3.1 and talked about the web app, which is the new WebRTC uh, client used by CMS. Now, in the two, we have some very interesting topics which are very essential when you're deploying in environment. So we're gonna discuss about how we can use API. So I'm gonna talk about the REST API clients we have been using since the CMS was introduced to the customers, and we'll also gonna do a demo and use the API which is already available on the web admin of the CMS server from 2.9 version. We will discuss call bridge grouping in detail and try to understand why we need it and how shall we configure it and what are the benefits of using call bridge grouping in our clustered environment. We'll discuss in detail about the SIP recorder and the streamer because in 2.x version we have been using XMPP SIP, or I mean XMPP recorder and streamer. However, moving on to 3.0 onwards, the recorder and streamer no more support XMPP. We'll be using SIP protocol to make recorder and streamer work. So we're going to discuss in detail about those. We will be talking about how to use smart licensing on the CMM, as it is mandatory to have smart licensing from 3.0 onwards, and also the CMM is an essential component from 3.0 onwards. We'll talk about CMM and TMS integration, and then discuss about what troubleshooting and logs are required when you are actually coming across to a problem. So we're going to go in detail about those also. So to begin with the APIs, so basically there are many ways of configuring CMS. Essentially, there are four ways to use CMS, configure CMS. One is the main mode management processor, which we call as MMP, which is basically a CLI, console access to the CMS server. We can SSH into it. We can configure the components configuration, like yesterday Satish took you through the call bridge configuration, the web bridge configuration, and all of that is done on the MMP. Then we have web admin, which is basically the web GUI access of the call bridge server. It is the user interface wherein you can configure things for call bridge. And it is only accessible via the HTTPS. However, when you get the server, it's a new install, it's a fresh install. You immediately cannot just give it an IP address and access the web admin. You have to enable the web admin, configure the web admin from the MMP interface to access the web GUI of the CMS server. Then third, and the very important tool to use your CMS essentially is the API, which is it could be any REST client, like, you can use Postman, Poster, or Insomnia, etc. to configure your CMS using API. However, moving 2.9, CMS has itself introduced it on the web admin, and it has become a lot simpler. So we're going to talk about the REST APIs, how we can use it, and then we're going to see the demo how easy it has become using it from the CMS web admin. And we need the STP access to the CMS server, then we can do the upgrades, upload the certificate files, backup and restore files. All of that can be done using the SFTP interface. So as we talked about, we can configure CMS using web interface, that is we call as web admin. SSH we call it as MMP, and then the API. Now, what things can be done on the MMP and what things can be done on the web admin, and why do we need API for configuration? So any service enablement, like we talked about call bridge configuration, web bridge, turn, um, all of these needs to be enabled using the CLI of the CMS. So be it a SIP recorder, be it a SIP streamer, that needs to be configured and enabled using the MMP interface. You can also generate certificates, CSRs and certificates of the MMP itself. Clustering, database cluster can be formed using MMP. And if there are edge components available in your CMS infrastructure, then you need to create trunks, load balancer or the trunk, which may not be required in future releases because we are no more supporting XMPP. Those trunks are essentially being used, for XMPP. But if in case you are in 2.9, then you may need to have, trunks going to your edge server. The web is used for a single call bridge configuration. If you wanted to add an LDAP server, only one LDAP server, you can do it over the web admin. All universal SIP settings like your SIP encryption, SIP bandwidth, all of that can be configured over the web admin. CDR receiver information can be configured. You can create core space on the web admin. Obviously, you can do the dial plans that we talked about yesterday on the web admin. And from the web admin, you can enable the detailed logging, wherein you can view the event logs as well as you can enable the detailed SIP traces, detailed web bridge traces, etc. Now, why do we need API? So everything is not available on the MM. So if in case you wanted to configure multiple call bridges, you wanted to do call branding, you wanted to apply certain rules to certain spaces, uh, you wanted to do some manual recording. So all of that is not achievable on the MMP or also on the web admin. Hence, you need the API. Now, API is can be used using any API client like Firefox Poster, Chrome Postman, Insomnia, etc. So when you are using any third party you know client, then you need a API URL which would always have /API/v1 in the URL. So that's always needed to actually distinguish from the HTTP method, which is a common HTTP method, than the API. And the version one means the version one of the API is supported. So you can use this any REST client API tool that you wanted to use to configure CMS. Having said, we have an option to do it from the web admin also now from 2.9 onwards. So these are the four methods we essentially use to configure our CMS or to see information or to pull information from the CMS. So if in case we wanted to retrieve the existing information from the CMS, we use get operation. If in case we wanted to create a new object, we use a post option. If in case we wanted to modify an existing object, we use put. And if in case we wanted to destroy that object which is created, we need to delete that object. So how it works is, your API client sends a request to the Acano, to the CMS server or the Acano server. So For it's an HTTP request goes and get you the results. So in case you get 200, okay, that means it's a successful communication or successful interaction. However, if you see 4xx, 5xx, those are the errors, and we need to see why are we getting those errors. So if in case I wanted to see, about calls, what all calls are running, and if I get 200, okay, I would see the information wherein I could see how many calls are going in. So in this, you will see the result is only one call. So there is only one call running, and which is using a sales core space on my CMS server. So this is a successful interaction happened between a client and the server. So if in case I wanted to see how many core spaces I have, I can just do a get operation and look for core spaces. So it shows core spaces total as 22. So that means I have like total 22 core spaces created on my CMS. And with this CMS core space unique core space ID, which is unique for every core space, I can pull up the detailed information of that core space. Now, this is a post operation that I'm doing on a core space wherein I'm creating a new core space, because post is an operation is an operation which is done to create a new object. So I'm creating a new core space with the name API core space and a URI 9000 and the call ID 9000. I get a 200 OK in the response. So that means my core space is successfully created, and I get that unique a long string which is unique to this core space only. How I do, I used a Postman. I use a www form URL encoded, and I basically put the name that I wanted to give to my space, URI I wanted to give to my space, and the call ID that I wanted to. There are other parameters also in the core spaces. If in case you wanted to add those, you can add those also. So these are the ones which I added and created a core space. In case I wanted to modify the created core space, I use a put operation. So I actually changed the name to API core space new. So I get a 200. Okay, that means that operation that I applied, or that change that I apply on the server, I get a 200 okay back, and that means my interaction with the server was a success. So here I did that. I added a secondary URI, but when I'm adding a secondary URI, I need that unique long string of the core space to be available so that I can only modify things to that particular space. I cannot just simply use core space and modify it for all. That is not possible. I need that unique ID of that core space wherein I'm doing any modification. Now, if case I wanted to delete a core space, I still need that unique core space ID, so that when I perform a delete operation, it would only delete that particular core space and no other core spaces are impacted. So I did a delete operation, and then when I look for the same core space, I didn't find anything. So that means it was a success and my core space was deleted. Now, this is the hierarchy. So this hierarchy is very important. So from the top level, if you see, it is system slash system slash profiles. So what that means is, if in case you are applying any configuration like profile, call branding profile, or any other thing, uh, that would have a global impact. So it would just not stay uh, for a particular space or a particular user, but this will have a global impact. So I'll give you an example. Let's say I have many co-spaces, but in my organization, there are some meetings, like 4 or 5 meetings, which happens every week. I wanted to always record those meetings, but and those are like particular spaces where those recordings happen. But I do not want every meeting to be recorded in my environment. So how could I achieve that? So when I know that this particular meeting, which happens every week, needs to be recorded, what I can do is I can apply a call leg profile at a core space level. So when I apply that call leg profile at a core space level or a call profile at a core space level, I know I can enable an automatic recording there on that particular space. But on the global level, I can still have, I can still have the manual recording enabled. So that means that meeting which is happening every week or every day, I can record it always because it's an automatic recording. Anybody joins into the core space, the recording would start automatically. However, um, if any other user or any other meeting needs to be recorded, then there is a manual configuration for it, which is applied globally. So they can do the recording, but they can demand for it. So they can enter the DTMF tones to start recording, or they can use CMM to start recording, or they can use their WebRTC client to start recording. But that is not the automatic recording. It would be a manual recording. So this is how you can basically design using the hierarchy of your API configuration. So there are restrictions, like your core spaces cannot have anything which like a your core spaces can only have a call leg profile, call profile, and call branding profile. Something uh, which it can only have. It cannot just have the IVR branding profile in the core space. That is only applicable to your system profile. So there are certain things that you have to keep in mind when you are planning or designing your environment as per your requirement. So whenever I have to do any API configuration, I always keep in mind that I keep the guide handy, because this is very, very important, because there are so many features and things that you can do using API. So this guide is always handy and always help you to do your configuration. Okay. Now, uh, we'll talk about the call bridge group and how we can load balance across meeting servers using this feature. So yesterday we talked about the database clustering, the bridge clustering, and what are the use of it, why do we need it. So database clustering actually makes our environment scalable, and resilient, and call bridge clustering helps us to make it scalable. Now, if we have just a cluster and we have not performed a call bridge group, what would happen? So this is the scenario which we are going to talk about as of now, is when there are no uh, call bridge group being configured on a CMS cluster. So Bob is a user. He dials 1000. So basically there is one call manager cluster or a call manager which has three trunks connected to CMS1, CMS2, and CMS3. CMS1, CMS2, CMS3 are in a cluster. Okay. So Bob is a user. He dials a number 1000. Now what CUCM does is that we're going to check the route pattern and then check the route list, checks the route group, and there are three trunks listed in the route group, and which are distributed in a circular algorithm. So what would happen? The call manager would use one of the trunk which has which is first on the which is at the top, and send that call via that trunk to CMS1. Now another user, Tom, dials in the same number, same conference ID, which is 1000. Again, the same process happens on the call manager. The CUCM routes that call the CUCM routes that to the route list would be checked, and then the route list would be checked, and then the route group would have the listed trunk, and we know the second number is for the CMS2. So the call would go to CMS2. So Tom is also connected, but connected to CMS2, and Bob is connected to CMS1. Now there is a third user whose name is Joe. He dials into the same conference 1000. Again, the route list is checked, route pattern is checked, route list is checked, and then the route group, it is the circular algorithm. So we see the third one is CMS, our trunk, which is going to CMS3. So the would go to CMS3. Now what would happen? So you have only made 3 calls, but the call capacity which is consumed on your CMS cluster is 9. Why is it so? Because in order to see each other, the CMS also has to create a distributed link. So our distributed link is created between CMS1 and CMS2, CMS1 and CMS3, and vice versa. So CMS1, even though there is only one call, but it has made 2 calls, distributed calls to CMS2 and CMS3, the consumption is 3 ports on CMS1. Similarly, 3 ports are being consumed on CMS2 and 3 ports are being used on the CMS3. So we have no call bridge group configuration, and unknowingly or knowingly, we are seeing that ours is consuming more resources. Because in order to give you a user a seamless experience, a distributed link will always be created between CMS1, CMS2, and CMS3 so that each and everyone can see and hear each other. So we see a lot of unnecessary utilization is being seen on the CMS cluster, which obviously we do not want, because we wanted to utilize our CMS capacity rather than, you know, uh, unnecessarily creating those distributed links and getting our resources utilized, even though we have just made 3 calls. So this is how you can, this is why you need a call bridge group. So call bridge group, what it does is it will eliminate unnecessary distributed links and give you an opportunity to use your CMS resources effectively. We're going to discuss in detail how that is implemented and how it is done. So this is like a distributed call, which is in a normal cluster environment without a CBG. We see there are participants who have joined onto 2 different CMS server, but in the same conference. And we see a distributed link is created from CMS1 to CMS2 and CMS2 to CMS1. So unnecessary one more port is being consumed on each CMS server, which is again a one-step call. And obviously, if in case you have 96 HD calls to be which you can make on CMS 1000, these 2 calls would you can minus these 2 calls because a band distributed link is created, which is consuming the resources on the CMS. Then CMS, the CMS team in the backend thought about it, and they came up with an idea of intelligent load balancing with CUCM. It was introduced back in CMS 2.1 for CUCM. So it basically enables the load balancing of call bridges and within the same call bridge group. So to understand that, let's say you have a call bridge which has like 8 nodes in it, but you only wanted to group 4 out of those 8. So you can do that. You can have those 4 call bridges in a call bridge group, and whatever configuration you apply to those call bridge group would only be applicable for those call bridges. It would not going to impact that configuration, not going to impact on the remaining 4 which you have in your cluster. Now there are certain things to keep in mind when you're designing your call bridge group. So call bridges within your call bridge group must have a RTT value of 100 millisecond. It should not be beyond that. But in a cluster, you can have it up to 300 millisecond. So this is something which is very important that you keep in mind when you are designing your call bridge group, especially when you have your call bridges located geographically. or distributed, geographically. So you should keep that thing in mind. Now, other things that you need on the side, because this kind of routing is only rely on the Cisco call manager. So you need to configure appropriate route patterns, route list, route group, and the essential trunks that you need for your CMS cluster. And also a very important point wherein you will create a SIP trunk security profile with accept replace header. So this is very important. This is to make your SIP trunk understand that if a SIP request is coming with a replace header, CUCM should not deny it and understand it. So because the call bridge grouping configuration or algorithm involves replace SIP replace header to do an appropriate routing of calls. Now, with call bridge groups. So now what we have discussed so far, we have discussed about how we're gonna implement this. What are the why is it essential to have call bridge group feature being configured in our environment, and with just a normal cluster, what are we missing? So we have talked about that. Now we're gonna discuss about details. We'll show you in an example how you can actually save your resources. So this is when you have a call bridge group configuration in place. Everything is same. You have a call manager, 3 trunks towards your CMS, CMS1 and CMS2 and CMS3. And also you have circular algorithm being set up on your route group on the call manager. So again, Bob dials the same meeting now, but the configuration has changed. CBG has been configured. CUCM checks the route list, checks the route group, and then in the route group we see in the circular algorithm, trunk 2 CMS1 is at the top. So the call would be routed using this trunk to CMS1. User Tom dials 1000, same thing happened. Route list, route pattern, route list, route group being checked, and we know that there is a trunk 2 which is pointing to CMS2. The call would be routed using trunk 2 to CMS2. Now what would happen? The trunk when the call is being received by the CMS2, in the background on the CMS, the them is run, and then CMS1 sends the re-invite with a replace header to CUCM to read out the call back to CMS1. And CUCM understand that replace header now because we have checked the accept replace header in the SIP trunk, and CUCM handles that call and sends that call, connect that call onto the CMS1. So now, instead of going it to connect to the CMS2, CMS1 uses the replace header and connects the call to itself. And the call manager knows that it needs to send call to CMS1 with the help of the replace header. Another user, Joe, dials in, checks the route pattern, checks the route list, route group, and we see that it means it would go to the CMS trunk to CMS3. Now CMS1 replaces the call, sends to the call manager reroute the call back to CMS1. So now we have 3 calls, all the 3 calls are connected to CMS1. Now what is the advantage? So we have only 3 ports being consumed. So we saw in the cluster environment, without a CBG configuration, distributed links were created. And because of the distributed links created, there was a greater consumption of resources on the CMS cluster. However, when we enable the call bridge group, instead of those additional 6 ports, we see only 3 ports being consumed. So this is the aspect of the call bridge group wherein you can save your resources. And we're going to talk about in detail how you actually fine tune your load balancing with call bridge group. Now, how actually the call replacement happens. So in this slide, you will see the endpoint 1 is already connected to call bridge 2. Okay. So the endpoint 1 is already connected to call bridge 2. There is a SIP invite. So there is a SIP call which is being made by the endpoint 2. And it is going to space 1. So it connects to the call bridge 1. So the call from endpoint 2 is connected to the call bridge 1. And it does mention the replace header. So replace header is being supported here. Now there is an algorithm between the CB1 and CB2. So yesterday Satish talked about the cluster, call bridge cluster. So every node in the cluster knows about its peer. So similarly here, CB1 and CB2 knows about each other. So they know there is there is a CB1 and CB2, and CB1 knows there is already a call going uh, on the space 1, and endpoint 1 has called to space 1 on CB2. So CB1 is aware of it. Now the replace query happens using call bridge 2 because it has the lower priority, and you also see there is a conference running on it. So call bridge 2 has a lower priority. There is load level is also 0. That means it's still able to receive calls. And then conference is running. The conference is already running on it. So now the call being replaced to call bridge 2 because it has the lowest priority. It has the conference running on it, and still it has a load level as 0, which means it can still receive calls. Now, once the call is replaced, the call to call bridge 1, the call bridge 1 sends a SIP invite with a replace header to call manager. Call manager understands that it needs to send the call to call bridge 2 instead of call bridge 1. So the invite is further sent to the endpoint. The call is connected, and we can see the video is being established with call bridge 2. So the media is going from call bridge 2 to endpoint 2. So this is how the call replacement works. Now, how can we fine tune our call bridge group? So in order to fine tune our call bridge group, there are certain parameters which we need. Essentially, these 3 parameters. One is the maximum load that your server can take, and how many conferences which are running in your environment at the moment, and what would be the new conference threshold. So load limit is basically a percentage that your call bridge can take. It is the maximum that your call bridge can take. Existing conference threshold is the free capacity before rejecting the existing conference. So these values you see here are the values which are like default values, and you can tweak your environment as per your convenience. And new conference threshold is basically a maximum percentage of a free capacity before it rejects any new conference request. So these 3 elements are important when you are designing your call bridge group and fine tuning your load balancing in your CMS cluster. So we'll talk about in detail. So let's give you an example of a CMS 1000. So in CMS 1000, the load limit is 96%, means, 96,000, which means this is the 100% load. So beyond this, it would be a problem for a CMS 1000 to handle calls. For CMS 2000, it is around 700,000 as the 100% load. Okay. And for any specification based CMS server, like any VM based server, it is basically 1.25 0 per virtual CPU. That would be the 100% load of it. Okay. Now, how would I define my load limit, my new conference load limit, and existing conference load limit? So, let's say if I wanted to load my server to the 100%, so I can define it to 100%. But how would I manage my new conference load limit? So these values are calculated on a scale of 1 to 10,000, which means uh, 0 is not, 0, if a value is a 0, then there would be no acceptance. Yeah, but if a value is like 10,000, that means 100% acceptance. It would always accept. And the default value which Cisco has prescribed is 50%. So if I scale my environment on this on the basis of 1 to 10,000, so it's like a 5,000. So if in case my new conference load limit is 5,000, and if a new conference request comes in, and I see and the call bridge sees that it is being running beyond 50% of its capacity, then it would reject that call. However, if it is below that, then it would accept the call. This is how it would consider the new conference request. However, when it is existing conference limit, so that means a request of a user is coming for an existing conference which is already running on a CMS. We still be scaling up it to 1 to 10,000, and the default value that Cisco suggested is 80%. So that means if in case a server running around 80% of its capacity and a new user wanted to join an existing conference, that request would be terminated, would not be allowed. However, if in case it is below 80%, then a user who wanted to join an existing conference would be able to join. So how actually it works in a cluster environment? We'll show you that. So we have a CMS1 and CMS2, which are a part of your call bridge group. Okay. And then you have a UCM cluster also. Now, the total capacity that your CMS server 1 has is 10 ports. And it has 3 spaces, space A, space B, space C. And when you have configured your cluster configuration, you have specified that you cannot go beyond 80% of what your server can take. Okay. Because 20% you still need to load balance your calls. Because if in case distributed links are created, then those would also need resources on your CMS server. And if there are no resources, then obviously distributed links would not be created. So you have buyout an option wherein you have left 20% of the server capacity to have distributed links created on your CMS cluster. Okay, so I can see there are 3 ports are already being utilized on CMS1. Now on a CMS2, CMS2 also has a load limit as 80%, and space A has 3 participants joined in, and space B has 5 participants, and there are no participants on the space C. Okay, and the load limit is 80. So what I see here is the 80% limit is being achieved on the CMS2. User calls in, and the call goes to CMS2. So it's a new call or an existing call. Okay, so whatever kind of a call it is the load limit has reached the 80%. So the limit that you have created on your CMS2 has already reached to 80%. So a call from user goes to space C on CMS2. The load limit is already 80%. CMS2 will reject the call. Why? Because the limit is 80% and it is going beyond its limit. It would reject the call. But as CMS1 and CMS2 are a part of a call bridge group, they know about each other. So CMS2 would inquire CMS1 and informs UCM that you can reroute the call to CMS1 because CMS1 is still available, and uses a replace header in the SIP invite to inform the UCM. Now the call routed to CMS1 and call would be completed. So you can see how intelligently it has been managed by the CMS, wherein one of the server is utilized to its potential, but that server knows there is a CMS1 available which could take a call and inform call manager using a replace query that that server is available and you can try and route the call to that server. And that server has only 3 ports being utilized, so load limit on that has not been achieved, so it can it can accept the calls. So it accepted the calls and the call was completed, and it's a seamless experience for a user because user didn't even know what has happened in the back end, wherein when the call was routed to CMS2, uh, has no capacity to take that call, but being routed to CMS1, and the call was handled appropriately. So it's a seamless user experience. Now, a scenario wherein a new conference situation has arrived. So you have CMS1 again, you have 10 ports available on CMS1, 3 calls are already made, load limit is 80%, and new conference limit is 50%. You have another server which is a part of the same call bridge group, 10 ports total, 3 calls on space A, 2 calls on space B, and load limit is 80%, and new conference limit is 50%. Now, a user calls in, and the call goes to space C, and it's a new conference request, and it went to CMS2. And what is the limit we have configured for new conference on CMS2? It is 50%. And we have already reached to that 50% mark. Now what would CMS2 do? 50%. CMS2 will reject the call. So CMS2 will reject the call, but it would intelligently talk to its peer and asking, okay, so you are here, let me instruct CUCM to route the call to you. And CMS2 informs the UCM to route the call to CMS1 with the replace header being sent. And call routed to CMS2, a seamless experience for a user, and you are intelligently able to load balance your CMS cluster. Now, the third scenario wherein we have a situation of existing conference. Similar, we have a same call bridge group, which is CMS1. Total ports are 10, 3 on space A, and new current conference limit is 60%. We have another server, CMS2, which has 4 calls on space A, 2 calls on space B. Load limit is 80%, new conference limit is 50%, and current conference limit, that is existence conference limit, is 60%. Now, what happens is a call is made to space A, which is an existing conference, or at CMS2. So this is an existing conference. We already have resources being utilized to 60% on CMS2. What would CMS2 will do? CMS2 will gonna reject the call because the capacity that has been configured on CMS2 is 60% for existing conference. But would talk to the CMS1 and instruct call manager that there is a CMS1 which could take a call, and sends the replace header in the invite and asks UCM to route the call to CMS1. So the call will be routed to CMS1. The user would be connected to CMS 1. It's again a seamless experience for a user because user in the backend doesn't even know where it is getting connected. But there was a successful communication that has happened in the backend. I hope this gives you an idea how important call bridge group can be when you have a lot of volume in your environment and how effectively it can handle your calls. So call bridge grouping when it was introduced, it was only for call manager, but later on it was also introduced for expressway. However, there is a catch, there is a condition wherein the CMS should be running minimum of 2.4 and the expressway version should be minimum of X 8.11. So this is the minimum requirement of using expressway with load balancing. So it would enable the load balancing for the call bridges which are a part of a call bridge group. Similarly, like what we have in a call manager, if we have a 8 node cluster, we just wanted to have 4 out of those 8 to be in a call bridge group, we can do that. The 4 would be like a normal bridges in a cluster. The requirement is same. We need 100 millisecond for the call bridges, which are the part of a same call bridge group, and 300 millisecond of RTT within the cluster. Now, on the expressway, call bridge utilizes the B2B UA agent, and a custom neighbor zone needs to be created. The zone profile having meeting server load balancing enabled. So this is when you create a neighbor zone, a custom neighbor zone, there's an option to enable the load balancing. So you have to create a custom neighbor zone. A normal neighbor zone for a load balancing will not work and will not help you with the call bridge grouping or intelligent load balancing. Okay. And also there is a catch. If in case you are using a load limit which is specified on your CMS, then expressway requires a unique neighbors each call bridge. Why do we need that? So we're going to discuss about that also. So if in case you are specifying a load limit, right, your expressway requires a unique neighbor zone for each call bridge in a cluster. So if in case you have 8 nodes, you need to create 8 individual neighbor zones, custom neighbor zones on your expressways. Now, why do we need it? So basically what happens is when you have a load limit set on a CMS, once the load limit is reached, the CMS would reject the call with 488 response. Okay. And when expressway receives that 488 response from a zone, it will assume that none of the peers is available to take that call. And hence your call will be rejected saying 488 not acceptable. However, in order to avoid that, it is recommended to have a different zone created for each call bridge cluster and the search rules created with different priorities so that the call can be appropriately routed via call bridge cluster, and load balancing can be done effectively. So expressway can also do a load balancing now from 2.4 onwards, and call manager also can help you to do call bridge grouping. Now, how to configure a call bridge? Okay, so in order to configure a call bridge group, you need API. So you have to create a new object using a post operation called bridge groups, and you can name your call bridge. Okay. Once your call bridge group is created, you can modify, that is, you can put and modify. You can use a put operation to modify your call bridges and add this call bridge group ID under your call bridge. So whichever call bridge have call bridge group ID, that would be a part of that particular call bridge group. Now, in order to tweak your load balancing configuration on a cluster, you have an option to modify under system configuration cluster in the API, wherein you can configure all these three parameters: load limit, new conference load limit basis points, and existing conference load limit basis point. This configuration is very, very important because this is how you can actually, load balance your CMS effectively. Apart from that, when you are doing it with the call manager, you have to enable the call bridge group parameter called load balancing enabled. So this particular parameter is set to true to do it with the call manager. And similarly, with Expressway also, you need to have this parameter true. There is an option called load balance indirect calls. You can also put it as true. Those are like not the direct calls to CMS, but the indirect calls which are coming via the Expressway or any other call control would be considered and would be load balanced by the CMS cluster in call bridge grouping feature. So there are other parameters also, and you can, as per your requirement, you can set them false or true with whatever you want to do. So this is basically being used, being done using a new 2.9 version of CMS, wherein the API configuration is available on the web admin itself. So filter it with call bridge group. I can see there is no call bridge group present on my CMS when I try to create one. So I create a new object, give it a name, and then I balancing enable as true because it is required as well as for my Expressway. And then whether I wanted to use my load balance my link calls or not, I don't want to. And then load balance your outgoing calls. Yes, I do that. And load balance indirect calls. Yes, I wanted to do that also. But if in case you wanted to do that for a user calls, you can do it for the user calls also. Load balance outgoing, load balance link calls. I'm not sure if we are supporting that now. But what I can recall is that was not being there in the earlier versions. But I have to check if it is being, being supported now or not. So I configured a coverage group, name it as CBG Black Belt. Load balancing is enabled, yes. Load balancing outgoing calls is enabled, yes. Load balance user calls are also true, that means enabled. And load balance indirect calls are also enabled. Now I need to configure this group under the call bridge. So I access one of the call bridge, which is in screenshot on the right. And once I able to access the call bridge 2, C bridge 2, I added the call bridge group ID and modify that configuration. So here it's a little simple. When you are using CMS API, it's a lot simpler than using any other REST API client to your for your API configuration on the CMS, and it is faster also. So my call bridge group has been added to C bridge 1, and now I need to take care of the outbound rules. The outbound rules are required because the call being routed, the call control using these outbound rules. So these outbound rules are equally important. If in case you are using an Expressway or a call manager, you must create appropriate outbound rules. And these outbound rules are also very important to create distributed links. So if in case you want your cluster to create distributed links, make sure you have outbound rules. Otherwise, you will see or hear from users complaining about that I was not able to see the other user video and not able to hear the other user video or audio. So why is that happening? Because these two users may have joined onto a different server, which is a part of a cluster. However, there are no appropriate outbound call rules being present, because of which the distributed link has not been created, and those users can join fine to their respective call bridge, and any other user who has joined to the same space on the same bridge can be seen and can be heard. However, the other users which are on the bridge cannot be heard and seen because there is no distributed link created. So these outbound rules are very important when you are creating a distributed link, and all equally important so that you can route your uh, re-invites back to the call control appropriately using the outbound rules. So what is required on a call manager? We already talked about that we need route pattern, we need to configure route list, route group, trunk, and then we need to create a SIP trunk security profile with the accept replace header to be on. This should be checked. So which means your trunk is gonna support accept replace header. Now configuring zone on a CMS on an expressway for a CMS call, make sure on that neighbor zone you disable the H.323, because we are no more supporting H.323 in newer versions, and we don't need it. So just a SIP call is good to be made to the CMS. In advanced section, you will see a zone profile, which you can set it to custom, and this will enable the meeting server load balancing parameter to be viewed, and you can turn it on. So when you will turn it on, that means your neighbor zone is now capable to for a load balancing with CMS server. Okay, so I need to cover the recording in the streamer, but I would uh, think that we can take a 10-minute break, and then we can try and start with the recorder and streamer. And I do have a PDF wherein the entire configuration is there for Callbridge group. I'll try to go through that configuration with you, and we will also share it later for your references when the slide deck and every information will be shared with you later on. So let's just take a 10 minutes break, and we can be back, and then we can start with recorder and streamer. All right. Thank you, everyone. So just wanted to show you the API which is being integrated to a CMS, uh, which is from 2.9. So is running 3.0. My is running 3.0. So um, I do have an API option here. So if I wanted to configure my API, or I wanted to configure my core space, I can either filter or I can pick it from here. Just go to the core spaces. So I see all of these core spaces being created. Either I wanted to modify these, or if I wanted to create a new, I will create new. And create one. So let's say my space. And URI is 5656. And let's create this space. Okay, so my space is being created. Now, if in case I wanted to modify my space, let me just go back to the return object list. Okay, and the no space information I can see here. I click this my space and wanted to modify this one. So I click on this subject ID. And let's say I wanted to just modify the name. So I will add my space is mine and then modify. Okay. So it's being modified. So this has become a lot simpler, when using the web admin interface of your CMS server. So it has become a lot simpler now. So let share that document, the Callbridge group document, and let me take you through that document to show you.
Abhishek, sorry to, your screen is not refreshing.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, let me
Yeah.
just
Can
discuss
you
the
stop?
VPN.
Yeah. Just repeat the
Let me
previous
stop
part
and
again,
reshare
please.
one.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll go. We'll in the PDF itself. It seems like the VPN is giving me a trouble. Let me check. Vikram.
Okay.
So can you see? Can we see it now? Fine. Is it okay? Or still
Yeah, I think
the same?
refresh rate is better now. Yeah, it's better now. Yeah, okay. Go ahead. Thank you.
Okay, fine. Okay, thank you. All right. So this is basically a document which could help you to set up your call bridge group in a call manager and a CMS environment, and it takes you from the scratch. I mean, it has the detailed steps which are needed from the scratch. So when it comes to CUCM configuration, as I talked about, you need a route pattern, route list, and route group, SIP trunk, and then you need a SIP trunk security profile being created with accept replace header being enabled. So here what we are doing is we are configuring our SIP security profile and adding that accept replace header, giving it a name so that we can identify this is what we require for a trunk to be used in call bridge group. Okay. Now we are trying to set up a SIP trunk for a CMS cluster, which we are considering as a 3-node CMS cluster. So we need 3 SIP trunks, right? And we need a security profile which needs to be applied to all those 3 trunks. And if in case you are using an older version of Call Manager, you can apply normalization script also, but it's not something which is mandatory to be applied. Now we have added the security SIP trunk that we have configured, and we need to repeat the same steps for second and third CMS server. The fonts may not be very sharp here because this is like a PDF document, not a PPT. But I'm just taking you through so that if in case you refer it later, that would help. So one, create the SIP trunk for all 3 CMS server. You should see all your SIP trunk should be full active in service and should be running. Now you can create a call bridge group. The route group, and add all these 3 SIP trunks into that route group. Okay. Create a new route list, add that route group to that route list, and then create a route pattern and add a route list to that route pattern. Now that was needed on the call manager side. That was needed on the call manager side. Now to configure your CMS from scratch, you need to configure a host name using the consent access or the CLI access of the CMS server. Okay. And add the DNS address, add the time zone, configure the time zone and the NTP server. So it's like from scratch, reboot your CMS. Make sure once you configure the NTP, always reboot your CMS. configure the web admin with certificates, and enable your web admin. You can configure your coverage and make sure that your call bridge is up and running. And you need to repeat these steps with all the three servers that you are going to deploy and bring it in the cluster. You may have more servers, so obviously you have to repeat these steps on the other servers also. I mean, on the n number of servers, whatever you are using for your clustering. And you can form a database cluster. Either you can have 3 servers in a database cluster, or you can go up to maximum 5 database nodes. So you can configure the database cluster and add all those nodes that you wanted to be in a database cluster to the master database. So database certificates are not required or maybe not mandatory before 2.7. But from 2.7 onwards, it is mandatory to have database certificates. So please keep in mind, if when you are installing and your CMS is 2.7 or above, please make sure that you use certificates for your database clustering. Once your master is configured, you can add the other servers to bring them in the cluster. So your cluster status should be like in sync with all the other nodes. So that means your cluster is up. I mean, your database cluster is good. And once your database cluster is configured and it's working, then we can configure the call bridge cluster. So yesterday, Satish did talk about that, wherein a unique name is required for each server to be in a call bridge cluster. And then we can form a call bridge cluster to make it more scalable. So you should see a heartbeat for each server. That means the connection between the servers are working. Configure a new space, and now you have a space created. We can start with call bridge group configuration, what we actually discussed today in our session. So that requires your load balancing enabled to be true. Outgoing calls, if you want, make it true. Indirect calls, obviously true. And then configure it using the API. So this is like a Postman that I have used, but I have also covered these screenshots, which can be helpful to do it from 2.9 onwards, which is inbuilt API feature. So you filter it with call bridge group. You'll see I do not have any call bridge group being created so far. So I will create a new one. Okay, so created a new call bridge group, name it as CBG Black Belt. I want my load balancing enabled, yes, because I wanted to load balance it with call manager or maybe expressway. My load balance link calls is not, it's unset. I do not want it. Load balance outgoing calls is true, and load balance indirect calls are true. If in case I wanted to do load balance user calls like our WebRTC or CMA user calls, I can make it true also. This will create a call bridge group, and it will give me a call bridge group ID, a unique ID. So now I have a call bridge group created and a unique ID. And the name of my call bridge group is CBG underscore black belt. Now, for each call bridge, which I intended to be a part of my call bridge group, I will go and add my call bridge group ID to that call bridge, so that call bridge would be a part of my call bridge group. So this is using Postman. Okay. And I can same thing, I can do it with the inbuilt feature on the CMS web admin. I will be more focusing on that. Okay. So I search for a call bridge, and I can see there are 2 call bridges listed, call bridge 1 and call bridge 2. That means these 2 call bridges are a part of a call bridge cluster. So now I know my CBG is already created. I just wanted to add my call bridge group ID to these call bridges. I want them to be a part of a call cluster. I mean, call bridge group. So I went to cbridge 2 and added my call bridge group ID. So when I click on choose, it basically gives me an option to select. So if in case you have multiple call bridge group created on your cluster, make sure you remember which one you wanted this call bridge to be a part of, so that you can identify with this unique string. So you apply a string and click on modify. Now this call bridge has been added to this call bridge group, which is uh, CB underscore black belt. So it has this call bridge group ID. That means is this particular call bridge, cbridge 2 is a part of my call bridge group now. And this is that clustering configuration which I talked about, like a load limit, conference load limit, and the existing conference load limit that you can also configure as per your environment and your requirement, because this is important to actually load balance your stuff correctly. So you can do it using 2.9 CMS API integrated with web admin. Search with cluster, you'll get this command, configure the parameters as you wanted to with the numbers that you wanted to. So this is being done, and I can configure it for both the call bridges. So ideally, it should be the same that you wanted to have on both the call bridges. This is for a verification if in case you are doing it and wanted to test. So this is how you basically set up your call bridge group in an environment with a call manager. This guide is for the call manager, but similarly, you can do it on the expressway also, as we covered in the session how you could do it with the expressway. So with this, I will take further with the recorder and streamer. Okay, so now what is new? Why are we talking about recorder? Recorder been a feature for a while in CMS, but now suddenly something has changed and we need to talk about the recorder. Now what has changed? Now CMS is no more using XMPP component. So those XMPP configuration like XMPP-client or XMPP-component, those are no more needed. And similarly, the old recorder, when I'm saying old recorder, I mean to say the recorder which component which was supported on 2.x version was using XMPP to do the recording. However, moving further, 3.0, XMPP is no more supported, and hence we need to modify our recorders accordingly to support to actually configured in a way so that we can use our new recorders, which using a SIP protocol can help us to record meetings. Okay, everything, the functioning and everything is almost the same. However, it has become a lot more easier and convenient to troubleshoot a SIP recorder because it uses the SIP protocol, and we all are familiar with SIP protocol. Uh, uh, you know, eh, Other than any other protocol, SIP protocol is something which we use on daily basis, and we are more familiar to it. So, record will be able to do a real-time transcoding and write it to a temp file on the NFS. And at the end of the call, your file will automatically be converted to MP4 format, which you can use, download to play it and uh, listen to it, or have a video of it to see what was being discussed, what is being what has happened in that meeting. So it is as convenient as it was in past, and now it has become little more easier to troubleshoot and to manage your recorder. So pretty much the same deployments that we have been doing in past with the recorder. However, it is recommended by Cisco not to use the call bridge and the recorder on the same server. It is not something we support or we recommend, And we encourage you to use a separate server for a recorder. And you can use it for training, I mean, for your lab purposes, but for production, this is not recommended to have a call bridge and the recorder on the same server. So XMPP component has been removed. So it would be a SIP recorder instead, but the deployment is pretty much the same as what you have, so far till 2.9. So it's the same for 3.0 also. Now, the new recorder and streamer support the layouts. So which this feature was not available in the old XMPP recorder, but you can have it in the new recorder and streamer. You can also see the SIP labels in the recording, that the recorded meetings would have a SIP labels, and you can also do a custom layout, even though, I mean, it requires a license, but then you can have custom layout feature also for in your recorder. So, and regarding the quality parameter, regarding the main video quality, you can uh, control it with a API parameter under the call lag, wherein you can have a max resolution setup, and that could actually help you to set up a different resolution. Okay. And now there was no way to actually limit how many recordings you wanted to allow on your recorder, but now the command has been added, which would allow you to have a limited recordings. If in case you wanted to limit your recordings, number of recordings, so let's say 100 or maybe 50 or maybe 20 or maybe 10, you can do that. It's a one simple command can help you to do it. And if in case you have a presentation being allowed parameter under the call lag profile, that is also supported now. So you can even see the presentation being if you have this parameter being enabled under a call lag profile. So presentation can also be viewed. What are the requirements? So when you are setting up a recorder server, the minimum that is required is a 4 physical core and 4 GB of. This is the minimum requirement for a recorder server. And one core can support up to 2 simultaneous recordings. And you just need zero point 0.5 GB of memory per recording. And the disk that it will going to consume is approximately 1 GB per hour for a recording, and you can do up to maximum you can do up to 40 concurrent recordings at a time. But if in case this is just for an HD recording, but if in case you wanted to do a 1080p, then obviously these specifications are go a little high. One core, one recording, 1 GB of is required, and it can consume up to 2 GB of your disk space, and the concurrent recording number would come down to 20 from. So this is the recorder's requirement. Now the commands. So the commands have changed a little because some commands has been added. So the first command that earlier we were using is as recorder listen, interface and the port. But now the command has been introduced, changed with a SIP parameter in between. So everything is SIP. So we have included a SIP parameter in that command. The command is recorder SIP listen A. So the interface that the recorder we're going to listen to, now we can specify whether our recorder wanted to listen to both TCP and TLS ports, or you just wanted it to listen to a TCP port, or maybe to a TLS port only. So you can have your specification mentioned as accordingly. The default ports would be 5060 and 5061, which are the default ports for any SIP call. Okay. If in case you wanted to use a TLS communication, right, with your recorder, make sure you apply the certificates. If certificates are not there, then you could not use TLS communication. So you have to only use TCP communication then. But with TLS, if you wanted to have TCP, you can have TCP as well as TLS with certificates. Now for the NFS, you have to specify the host name or the IP address of your NFS server and the directory. the command would help you. This command was was also there earlier, wherein you can set up a resolution that you wanted to have for your recordings, whether you wanted to do 720p or you wanted to do 1080p. You can set that up using the command. So a few commands, it's pretty much the same commands that we have been using for recorder. This new command is recorder limit. So the limit that you have is 450 by default set up on recorder. But if in case you wanted to reduce it, you can reduce it to a number that you wanted to. But you cannot go beyond 450. So it should be within 450, and then the limit could come down to to any number that you wanted to. But if in case you change the resolution, obviously this call limit number would go down. So if in case I make 1080p, then this number would come down. The call limit number default would not be 450 then it would come down. And then accordingly, if in case you wanted to limit your recordings, you can use this command recorder limit and limit your recordings also. Now, recorder SIP trace. So this is being added to a recorder because on the recorder, we do not need to enable the web admin. So detailed traces are only available on the web admin, but we do not want to enable it on the recorder server. So we have a CLI command which can be used to start the SIP trace, and we can again start it to 30 minutes, 24 minutes, and we can leave it on. So it's up to us. And then finally, we can build the recorder. So SIP traces are recorder SIP traces are only needed when we wanted to collect the logs for some recorder issues. So now we need to configure a record URI, SIP recorder URI. That's important because this is the parameter on which the routing would happen. So when you will create a call profile, under a call profile, you have an option to create a SIP recorder URI. So whatever the domain which is on the right hand side after @ is the one which is being matched to route the call to the recorder from your call bridge. And recording mode could be automatic and manual as per your requirement. So demo@recorder.com. So demo@recorder.com means recorder.com should be present in your outbound rules to route it to the recorder. If it is not there, then obviously the call could not go through. And then if in case you wanted to use a manual recording, then obviously you need DTMF profile to be configured, wherein you can use DTMF tones to start the recording, or you can use CMM control to do it. But if in case you wanted to use the DTMF to start recording, then obviously you need to configure the DTMF profile and apply that DTMF profile under the system profiles, which is globally, which is a global profile and would be taken into consideration by all the core spaces which are configured on your CMS because it's a global profile. So these are the outbound rules. I have created an outbound rule and I have specified the SIP proxy address. So if a request would come for a demo@recorder.com, the recorder.com would be matched and forwarded to a SIP proxy, which is 10.106.81.58, which is in my lab, and will be further routed. Now I have mentioned some ports after the IP address. Why I have mentioned that? Because I'm not using the default SIP ports for 5060 and 5061. I'm not using. Even though I mean I could use it, these servers are two different servers, and 5060 and 5061 can also be used. But as in configuration, I've been using different ports, and I wanted to show if in case you are using any other port other than default 5060 and 5061, then you need to mention those ports, append those ports in the SIP proxy. So what I did, I have mentioned the ports for TCP as well as TLS communication because in my lab I wanted to use both. Is I wanted to use just a TLS, I could only mention the TLS port uh, and just remove the TCP communication outbound rule, which is basically an encrypted call. So I made a successful recording, and I can see my call has been connected, and you will see it as a SIP call under your status calls. When you will expand that, you will see that there is a call being made, which is your, you will see this URI that you have configured for your recorder in that call. So if you see that, that means your call is connected and the recording is happening. Once and you'll see a temporary file would be created, which would once the recording is ended, then it would be automatically converted to a MP4 file. Now, some quick troubleshooting aspects of the recorder. If you see your recorder is being not licensed, then you don't see a recorder license, then obviously you cannot do recording. Uh, if you are running smart licenses, make sure on your CMM you should have in compliance for your recorder. But if in case you are using traditional licensing and you do not see a recording licensing being activated on your call bridge, then make sure you reach out to the licensing within Cisco and make sure that you have this licensing, this recorder licensing being there in your file if in case you have purchased it. So that's mandatory. Without a license, you cannot do a recording. So on 3.0, CMM is a mandatory component, and if in case you are using a smart license, then you should see a compliance for your recording license also. But if you have opted to go with a traditional license, that then your call bridge must have the recording license installed in that license file for recording to work effectively. Otherwise, you'll see in the logs, if you search the event logs with no license, you'll see you can see a hit in the event log. That means something is wrong with the license. If you troubleshooting your recorder, you can run this log follow on the CLI of your recorder, and you may come across two errors. There are errors related to NFS storage or maybe some network issues to reach to your storage. You may see that. So make sure that the IP address or the FQDN you have mentioned for the NFS is correct, and you have mentioned the correct directory also, and you have a reachability uh, to the NFS from the CMS. That needs to be checked. So when you see a network connection error, so if you come to the uh, CMS status page, general status page, you will see an error under the fault condition. So if you see an error under the fault condition, that means this is the problem that your server is currently seeing. So it says recorder at demo at recorder.com is unavailable, connect failure. So this means the call bridge is not able to reach to the recorder. There is no communication between the call bridge and the recorder. There could be many reasons behind it. One, the network connectivity is not there. Second, the port that you have mentioned in your recorder configuration may not be added to your outbound rule, like the way I appended is missing. So when I did recorder enable, I can see ports in use by other services. So basically, what happened here is I'm using a recorder on a call bridge. Okay. And my call bridge is already using my SIP ports for 5060 and 5061. So if I try to run my recorder and try to use the same port, I will get this error. So this is also one of the example. And if in case the routing is not appropriate and the wired port is not open in your network, you may come across to this error. So all of these can play a role for network connection error. Okay, that was for the recorder. Now, streamer and recorder are pretty much the same. Uh, However, recorder is being used for recording, and SIP streamer can be used to stream the recorded meeting, or also can do the live streaming. We officially support vbrick, so I have a vbrick DME server in my lab, which I could use to do my lab recreate, or maybe I used to build these slides. But I've seen customers using other streamers also and working well with CMS. Again, the streaming component was also being used for a long time, and the same licenses, the license which is being used by recorder is also being used by the streamer. And it was an XMPP component. It was using XMPP protocol, but now moving further with 3.0, it will also be using the SIP protocol, because XMPP is no more supported. Okay, so this feature is, if in case you wanted to configure streamer, make sure that you are doing it on a virtualized platform. Cisco Meeting Server 2000 and X Series cannot have this component installed. Okay, so please keep in mind, do not install streamer on a CMS 2000 or a X Series server. Okay, and it is a recommendation not to run a new streamer server on a call bridge, or also with a new recorder. So co-located servers are not recommended. Do not just run a streamer on a separate server rather than running it on the same server as what you have a recorder on, or maybe if you are running a call bridge on it. Do not do it on that. This is for the production. Obviously, in the lab environment, you can do it, but it's not recommended to do it in the production environment. So again, the deployment is pretty much the same. In past it was using the XMPP signaling mechanism to talk to the stream. Now it would be using a SIP. So everything is converted to SIP now, and it will not no more be using XMPP. But the deploy methods are still the same. And having the streamer co-allocated with recorder or with co-allocated with call bridge is not supported, or it's not recommended uh, for a production environment. Considering that you are running your streamer on a dedicated server and you have a 4 physical core and 4 GB RAM, which is the minimum requirement, and you are not subscribing your virtual CPUs than your physical cores. So the maximum 1080p streams that you can get is 150. That is the maximum streams that you can get. And if in case you are using a 720p stream, you can get up to 200 streams. Even if you increase the capacity of your servers, you cannot go beyond this number. So the highest number that you can go for a 1080p streaming is 150, and 200 for 720p streaming. You cannot go beyond that, even you keep on adding virtual CPUs to your server. So a few tweaks in the commands of a streamer. So streamer has been added with some SIP command, because now it is going to be a SIP streamer, not an XMPP streamer. So again, it's the same as what you did for recorder. Streamer SIP listen the interface and the TCP or the TLS port. If in case you wanted to have just a TLS, specify just a TLS port and leave the TCP port. But if in case you wanted to have both, please mention the port numbers if you are not using a default port to for streaming server to listen at. Obviously, certificates are required when you are doing a TLS configuration for streamer. Make sure you apply the certificates. But if in case you just wanted to use TCP, just carry on with TCP, and then there is no requirement of the certificates. So you can also limit your streamer to the number. The current limit is 200 for 720p, and it cannot go beyond that. But if in case you wanted to reduce it to a number that you want, you can obviously use a command streamer limit and limit it. Okay. And once you enable your streamer, then the success for your certificate and your uh, CA bundle. And then it should say that streamer being enabled. So that means it's a success. And this is required when you wanted to have a TLS communication with between the call bridge and the streamer. So I have configured a streamer in my lab wherein I have specified a TCP port and a TLS port with certificates, because certificates are mandatory when you are configuring for a TLS. If you configure it with a TLS and do not apply certificates, it will not let you to complete the configuration for stream. Again, similarly, like what we did for a recorder, we need to create a SIP stream URI under a call profile, and that domain, that whatever we are creating, that URI should be matched in the outbound rules to route to the streamer. And streaming mode could be automatic and manual as per our requirement. So I created a call profile, okay, and created a stream URI. Now the important part is I wanted to create a stream URL, okay, and this stream URL needs to be applied under a core space, which is the core space needs to be used for streaming. So this stream URL is an important parameter and needs to be applied under a core space, which needs to be enabled for streaming. So this stream URL, how do you basically construct this stream URL? So the stream URL format is, because I'm using a VBreak. So for VBreak, the format is RTMP : // the username and password, username : password, and then the VBreak IP or FQDN /live /name of the stream. So depending on whatever streaming server you are using, whatever the username and password, the format would be the same. However, you need to modify the username and password, which is by default for VBreak is broadcast, and for a different one, it could be a different username and password. So what I did is I configured a stream URL RTMP, and the username for VBreak is broadcast : password for VBreak is broadcast. This is the IP address for my VBreak DME, and then /live, which is mandatory parameter to be there, and the name of the stream that I wanted to give. So I named it and applied this stream URL configuration under my core space. So this URL needs to be applied under a core space. So now when the request would come demo@streamer.com, the streamer.com would match the outbound rule, and it would see what is the SIP proxy address to forward this request. And it would forward the request to the SIP proxy, which is basically my streamer server. And as I'm using I've specified the ports in my streamer configuration. I have appended those ports under my SIP proxy. If in case I'm using default 5060 and 5061, then I do not need to append those ports specifically under a SIP proxy. It would be considered as default. So I can see my streaming call is successfully connected to the space, which I named as stream, and streaming is happening successfully. Below is the screenshot from a VBreak, wherein I can see my stream is being streamed, and I can probably somebody can took whoever the BB brick administrator can take the URL from there and share it with people to stream the content to be viewed. Again, troubleshooting of streaming is same as recorder, because streaming uses the same license as what recorder uses. So if in case there is no license, then obviously you need to purchase the recording license, and that would enable the streaming also. So if you see a TLS port issue, if TLS port configured and no certificates are applied, you have to configure uh, uh, only the TCP port. Then you cannot just use TLS port. And if in case you have a TLS port configured and you wanted to do a TLS verification for SIP, there are commands which you can use, like SIP TLS trust and the cert bundle, TLS SIP verify enable. So that would, bring in the trust, and verify would also verify that those cert bundles are correct or not. And then only the connection would be trusted between your streamer and call bridge. So if you see here in the screenshot, I have configured a TLS port, which is 7001, but I have not configured the certificates. So as I have not configured the certificates, it is giving me an error, TLS port set, but no certificates configured. So that means I cannot bring up my streamer unless I will remove the TLS port from there, or otherwise I would apply the certificates on my streamer. Then only I could configure my streamer completely. Now what happens, you can see your SIP call is being reaching correctly to the streamer, but still your streaming is not working. Okay. So if you look at these logs, in the logs it says call one, that means the call has reached to the streamer. These are the logs taken from the streamer. So you see that the call one, that means call has reached to the streamer, but showing an error, failed parse stream URL. Okay. And that eventually leads to start a connection to a RTPMC server. So let's discuss about the discuss about the stream URL, that we have built up the stream URL. If in case that stream URL is not built up correctly, then you may come across to such errors. Okay. So make sure that stream URL that you are configuring is correct with the username password that you have for your streamer. And then it should be, this error should not be seen. Now the call is successfully reaching to the streamer server, and I can see that the URL that I configured, stream URL, is being successfully seen. So that means my stream URL is configured correctly and my streaming is also successful. And I can see that, this URL is present in my logs. So my streaming is working now because I have corrected my RTMP stream, which is missing. So the default port that needs to be used here is 1935. So that is the default port which is being used for RTMP connection. If in case you're using any other streamer also, you would be using 1935. However, all the other information may change depending on your streamer type. How to see if there is a call being successful from the call bridge? In the logs, you could see that the call is being forwarded and matched and being sent from your call bridge further. So those are like normal SIP messages that can be seen and will allow the call to go from call bridge further to your streamer. So this is how you see, right, on your call bridge, wherein you see outgoing SIP call to demo@streamer.com from space stream. So you see this call is being getting forwarded, and then it's joint space stream. So that means that call was made and the streamer client was streamer client would be able to successfully join the space. So that means call being forwarded from the call bridge and being joined successfully to the space, and the component has been successfully started. So this is all from me. Now the further sessions would be taken by Sharon. If in case you have any uh, uh, So if in case you have any questions, that can be addressed in the Q&A panel, or it can be addressed at the end of the session. So back to you, Vikram.
Thank you, Abhishek. Okay, guys, we'll take a short, quick 5 minutes break, and then Sharon would join us for the second half. We'll be covering smart licensing and other topics pending for today. So we'll break for 5 minutes, and we'll be back we'll start at 12:35. Thank you.
Everyone, my name is Sharan. Hope my audio is clear and loud, and you're able to see my screen. This is the last section of this 2-day training that we're going to cover. In this section, we're going to go over the CMM smart licensing, what is new in smart licensing, and how the CMM basically calculates licensing usage. We're going to also try and look at how the CMM actually integrates with the TMS so that you can see the scheduled meetings and perhaps even use the phone.
Sharon, are you able to hear us? We lost your audio.
Is my
Sharon, we
audio,
lost your audio.
clear? Yeah, I believe. Yeah, clear now?
Yeah, I can hear you now. Can you start over, please?
Yeah, sure, I'll do that. I
Thank
think
you.
my VPN got disconnected. Sorry about that. Yeah.
Okay.
All right. So
Okay,
let me just start over. Yeah. So from 3.0, the CMM has become mandatory, right? From version CMS version 3.0 or CMM version 3.0, CMM hasn't become mandatory because it is the CMM server who actually takes care of license for our CMS server. Smart licensing, on the other hand, is not mandatory for all the users, right? For all the customers. Smart licensing is mandatory for the customers who are deploying CMS 3.0 for new deployments, basically. For any customer who is actually upgrading from an older release to a newer release, it is not mandatory, but it is recommended that we actually move on to use smart licensing because that is where we are all headed, right? Other major change with respect to licensing is that licensing is assigned, if a license is assigned to a user, it is counted as being used. It is not necessary that the user, that particular user, has to be in a conference or a meeting or not. It really does not matter whether that user is in a meeting or not. If a license is assigned to a user, it is counted as used. And all the ACUs, the older ACU Akeno capacity units, needs to be migrated to SMP because the ACUs are not supported on your 3.0 licensing method. Right? It is supported on your CMM CMS once you move into 3.0. Specifically on the CMM, we have these three licensing methods. One is the smart licensing, where you would basically connect to your CSSM, that is your Cisco Smart Software Manager, which will actually hold your virtual account and the CMS licenses that you would actually buy, right? So your CMM would actually connect to the CSSM to do some sort of validation, whether you are entitled to use certain number of licenses or certain number of calls or not. The traditional licensing method is where you have is what you have been using so far, at least till 2.9, where you have the CMS file which is placed on the Cisco meeting server itself. So this does not mean that the CMM does not come into picture. Even for a traditional licensing method, CMM still plays a role. The difference here is that before, the CMS server used to we just used to put the CMS license file there and the CMS would get licensed. But now you need the CMM so that it can actually communicate with the CMS and validate the cms.lic file and tell you whether you are in compliance or not. And finally, there is a third mode in CMM, which is called no licensing mode. What this basically means is that you need to have a different CMM server who will be doing licensing for your CMS cluster. If you select no licensing here, this means we are opting this CMM or we are using this CMM only for meeting management. Right? If you do not have meeting management and if you're not doing licensing management on the CMM is not playing any role at all. Right? So there should be at least one CMM in your infrastructure if you're running 3.0, which is set for licensing mode, either smart licensing or traditional licensing, so that it can tell the CMS server whether it is compliant or not. Okay. So how do we get the CMM registered with the Smart Software Manager? Right. In this section, we are trying to focus on how we can get smart licensing to work. Right. So that's what our focus would be. So for the first thing is we need to have, before we can actually get it licensed or whether we can decide whether our CMS server is in compliance or not, we need to have some sort of registration between the CMM and the Smart Software Manager. That is your CSSM, right? So it is a CSSM where you would actually have your PAK converted, the PAKs which you get when you buy the CMS licenses, which you would convert into smart licenses. So you would place these smart licenses on a virtual account on your CSSM. Right? So what you would ideally need to do is you need to log into the Cisco portal, the CSSM portal. You will need to navigate to the corresponding virtual account where you have the Cisco meeting server licenses, and you will need to generate a token from there. Once you generate the token, you should log into the CMM. And once you connect to the CMM, you can go to the licensing page and you can click on register and you can paste that token there and click on OK. So this will basically do some sort of registration between your CMM and the CSSM, which is your Smart Software Manager. Right. Once there is an active link between your CMM and your CSSM, assuming that your CMM and your CMS server is already connected, when the CMS server sends its usage reports or your usage information to the CMM will basically validate this against the CSSM, right? There will be some sort of allocation that has been provided for this particular registration. So the CMM is going to validate whether the usage which the CMS sent to us is okay or whether the usage is entitled or not. So the CMM will do some sort of logic there. It'll understand whether the CMS is in compliance or whether it is out of compliance. Right? And based on that, the CMM will forward some information to the CMS so that the CMS can either continue to work or it will do some sort of enforcement so that the users or the administrators are aware that they are currently running out of compliance and they need to install more license or that they need to reduce their usage. Right? Now, to specifically understand how we actually install that token so that we can register our CMM to the CSSM, we'll move further and see it here. So this is the page where we can actually set this up on the CMM, right? If you log into the CMM, Cisco Meeting Management, go to Settings and Licensing, you can change the licensing mode here. That is the first thing that we should be doing. So if you are setting the smart licensing as the licensing mode, you can click on Change and select the smart licensing. right? We also have the traditional mode or no licensing mode. If you click on change, you should get that pop-up and you should be able to select the appropriate mode there. Once this is done, you can always click register and paste in the token, which you will get from the CSN, and click on OK. So on the next page, you'll get a better idea on how exactly you can actually get it registered. So here on this particular image, you're connecting to your smart software manager, and you're connected to your exact virtual account, which is hosting your CMS licenses. So in this page, you should be able to create a new token, basically generate a new token. And once you have this token, you can copy it over using this option. You can just copy the token, go back to this registration page here in licensing and click on register, paste the token on the pop-up that you get and click on register. So once you do this, your CMM should get registered to the CSSM so that it can now validate the licensing usage which the CMS sends to the CMM. Okay. Now, considering smart software licensing, there are different deployment methods that we can use, right? This is something which applies to all Cisco products, whichever is using smart licensing, not just for CMS or CMS or CMM. This concept applies for pretty much all the Cisco products which would use smart licensing, right? So you have 5 different deployment methods available here. In our example, we are going to consider the Cisco product as CMM, right? Because it is a CMM which will be talking to the Cisco cloud for the CSC SSM registration. So this is our CMM in our example, right? So the first method is a direct cloud access, where your CMM would directly connect to your licensing cloud, right? The Cisco.com where your licenses are hosted. So that is the one of the easiest method where you can directly get connected to the CSSN and you can sync the licensing usage there. The other method is to use a transport gateway or a HTTPS proxy so that your requests are not directly going to your Cisco.com cloud, rather it is going through a proxy. So it's slightly more secure. But then again, you will have to deploy this proxy server so that it can handle that up and down transactions. Then you have 3 and 4 methods, which is basically using something called a satellite server. So satellite server is like a local entity which will actually validate your license, right? More like a local validator of your licenses. So what happens here is your Cisco products would only talk to your satellite server, which is the local entity which will validate your licenses. And this satellite server would be talking to your Cisco cloud. And that communication will happen periodically, right? There will be some sort of sync in which this satellite server will communicate with the Cisco cloud where the licenses are actually hosted, and it will do a sync there, right? You have 2 methods of deploying a satellite server here. That is what we are seeing in method 3 and method 4. One is a connected method where it'll do that automatic kind of synchronization, periodic synchronization. And then you have a disconnected method, right? You have a disconnected method on deploying satellite servers as well, where let's say once a month, there'll be some sort of manual sync that will happen between the smart software manager satellite and the actual Cisco cloud where the licenses are hosted. Now, the final option here is something called license reservation, right? The first thing I have to tell you about this is it's not yet supported, and this is in the roadmap. Okay, and this is only for those customers, for example, who are highly secured infrastructure and who cannot communicate outside. Okay, this only applies for intelligence environments or military departments and things like that. It is not for every other customer. It's only specifically for those secure infrastructures who have no way of connecting to the outside world. And this is only in roadmaps, and it is not yet deployed or available. And even if we are to use an infrastructure like this, we have to get approval and we have to go through the BU for this, for the CMS, CMM BU to get this applied, right? So this is more like a permanent license kind of infrastructure where you can actually paste the licenses here and it would remain there. And there is no need for weekly sync or a manual sync of that sort. Okay. All right. Now, the next thing is we need to understand how the CMM is actually validating the license or how it is calculating the license usage, right? So the CMM gets the usage, the license usage or the actual call usage from the call bridge. So the CMM collects all this information from the call bridge and it will compare it with the licensing file that is uploaded on the call bridge, depending on whether it's a traditional licensing mode. And it will otherwise it will compare it with the CSSM, provided it's a smart licensing mode. Right? And once it compares this usage against the corresponding licensing method, it will decide whether we are in overage or not. Overage is a scenario where we consider that a customer is using more than what they're entitled, right? So if a customer is using more than what they're entitled, we consider that as overage and we assign certain colors for that. So if you are not in overage, we set it as green, that we are in the safe zone. There is no additional use of licenses that we were entitled to. But if you are using more than what you're entitled, we place that into the red zone or something like a danger zone, where you are actually using more than what you're entitled. Right? So it is basically a validation against the corresponding licensing method. If it is if it is a traditional method, it will validate it against the cms.lic file that is on the CMS. If it is a smart licensing method, it will validate it against the CSSM. Right? And depending on what the outcome is of this comparison, the CMM will update CMS regarding that information. Right? So basically, the CMM, what actually does is it does not actually tell the CMS if it is not in overage, right? That is what actually happens there. Now, whenever the CMM hits an overage, let's say a customer is utilizing more than what they're actually entitled, the first thing would be the CMM home screen or the UI or the overview page will have notifications and alarms stating that you are in overage. Right? And the CSSM will also send out email notification to the corresponding associated email address on the CSSM portal so that the users or the administrators are aware that we are in overage. Right? Now, some more details on how the CMM actually counts or decides when we are in overage and when we should do some sort of enforcement. I would like to leverage this next slide, which is more graphical and would be easier to understand. Right? So let's think of a scenario where a customer is completely licensed, right? And they are using, let's say, smart licensing, right? They're completely licensed and everything is working well. Right? CMM is connected to CMS, CMM is connected to the CSSM for your smart licensing, and everything is working well. Right? So let's say the customer keeps using the CMS and everything is within their entitled limit. There is no issues at all. Everything remains green. Right? So let's consider a scenario when the customer starts or enters an overage, which means the customer starts using more than what they are entitled. Right? So if the customer does this for 14 days in a 90-day period, there is nothing wrong which is going to happen. There's nothing wrong, as in the CMS server will continue to work. There'll be no impact at all. When I say 14 days, it does not necessarily have to be continuous days like 1 to 14 throughout together. In a 90-day period, the customer can actually go into overage for up to 14 days within a 90-day period. Right? But when it hits the 15-day mark, that is when the issues actually start. Right? When it hits the 15-day mark in a 90-day period, the CMS is actually going to generate some warnings, and actually it's going to generate some errors, and the CMM will notify the administrator that there is something wrong. The licenses are in overage mode, which means you might need to acquire more license or perhaps reduce your usage. Right? The CSSM will also send out email notifications to the corresponding email account stating the same information. And if this same behavior continues for another 90 days, so assuming that you did not add more license or you did not reduce your usage, if this continues for another 90 days, that is when the enforcement will actually take place. So till now, for the first 90 days, there is absolutely no issues except for the warnings or the error messages or the error notifications on the email. Your CMS server will continue to work, your conferencing, everything will work without any problems, right? But if this overage continues for another 90 days, that is when some sort of enforcement will actually kick in, right? The first thing is when you hit this 90-day mark, the CMS server will actually show a text message on the screen when you join the meeting stating that you are not in compliance anymore and that you need to contact your administrator. The conference will still work, but you will see that some sort of text message on the screen, and you will also hear an audio prompt stating something similar, right? The thing is, it will be there for each and every participant for the first 30 seconds when they join the conference, right? After the first 30 seconds, it'll go away. And let's say if this situation continues for another 90 days. So right now it is 180 days altogether, right? So if we hit the 180-day mark, then what happens is it's a similar text error and prompt that you will hear, but the difference here is the text messages and the prompts do not go away. The text messages and the prompt will be there throughout the meeting for each and every participant. So how do we go away from all these problems? So you have two options. Either you add more licenses so that it comes to the normal range, or it comes under an entitled range, or you will need to reduce your usage. You can reduce the usage and it should go away also, right? These are the two options you have, or you can do both. I mean, basically reduce your usage and add more licenses, because you're obviously having more calls than what you have actually bought licenses for. Okay. One last thing that I want to show you on this topic is this is what you would ideally see when you are not in compliance, right? It'll just show a message stating your deployment is out of compliance. Please contact your administrator. And for alarm 2, it'll be just there for, let's say, 30 seconds. And for alarm 3, after 180 days, it is going to be there throughout the meeting, right? Is my audio still clear? I just wanted to check. There was an issue with my VPN, so just double checking.
Yes, Sharan, we can hear you loud and clear.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Vikram. All right, so let's move to the next topic. Now that we have covered smart licensing and connecting it with the CMM, right? Hopefully now we are able to understand why sometimes once we move to 3.0 CMM and CMS, why that out of compliance alarm shows up at the top, right, on the CMM UI, and how we can actually move away from those scenarios. Right? Now the CMM TMS integration, right? So why do we even need to do this CMM TMS integration? The first thing is once you do this CMM TMS integration, you should be able to see the scheduled meetings before they start. You should be able to see the scheduled meetings which you have in the TMS. You should be able to see it on the CMM itself, right? The other advantage is that you should now be able to use your TMS phone book, which you configure on the TMS, and you should be able to use it on the CMM when you are, let's say, adding a new participant to an existing meeting, right? So if you have an existing meeting on the CMM and CMS server, you can click on add new participant, and you should be able to find a participant from that TMS phone book, which you have associated with the CMM server during the initial configuration. So it adds a little bit of convenience to the administrator to, let's say, add a participant. So to achieve these things, you will have to basically do 3 major configuration tasks, which we'll go through in the coming slides. The first thing is to connect CMM to the TMS. Right? We need to obviously do some sort of configuration on the CMM so that it will communicate with the TMS server. The next thing is to associate a call bridge cluster, which is configured on the CMM and associated with the TMS server. Right? So once you connect your CMM to TMS and you already have a CMM, you already have a CMS cluster which is added in CMM, you need to associate that cluster to the TMS that you added now on the CMM. The final thing is to set up a TMS phone book access. Right? That is also, you need to do some configuration on the CMM as well as on the TMS. Okay, so let's go through them one by one. The first thing is to connecting to TMS from the CMM. Right? It's pretty straightforward. On the CMS server, on the CMM server, you can go to settings, TMS, and you can check this box here. You can use TMS with meeting management so that we will be able to communicate with the TMS server. Once you check this box, a list of items which were initially grayed out will be available for you to fill it up. Right? You can enter the TMS server IP address. You can also use an FQDN, provided you have the corresponding error calls and resolution configured. Then you can select the protocol, HTTPN or HTTPS. Remember that if you use HTTPS, you will also need to use a certificate validation here. In this example, we have just used HTTP. Then you need to enter the username and password so that you can connect to this TMS server. Right? Once you complete this and click on save, you are basically connected to the TMS server. Okay. Now associating an existing CMS cluster on the CMM with the TMS. Right? For this, you need to go to the servers. On the CMM server, you can navigate to servers and click on this associate cluster with TMS button. Right? When you click on this button, you should get a pop-up where you can actually select a CMS server from a drop-down list. Right? So it depends, the drop-down will actually depend on what all servers are available here, right, in this table here. So you'll get the drop-down and you are supposed to select the primary call bridge server as configured on the TMS. So that is the prerequisite here. Whatever call bridge server or whatever CMS server that you are configuring here should be already configured in the TMS. Otherwise, you cannot get this configuration to be completed. Right? This CMS server, whatever you have, should be already associated or configured on the TMS server, which you are going to associate it with. Right? So when you click on this associate cluster option, you will get a pop-up as shown here on the left side. So you can basically click on this drop-down and select the corresponding CMS server. So you are expected to select the primary CMS server as what is configured on the TMS server. Right? It will have a secondary and a tertiary server, but you have to select the primary server when you click on this drop-down and select. The other thing that they're asking for is the TMS system ID. So when you add a CMS server to TMS or any device for that matter, you should get a TMS system ID associated with it. Right? So you basically need to copy over this value and put it here, and you can click on done to associate the cluster with TMS. So what it really does is you associate this CMS 3.0 cluster here that I've configured on CMM. It will be associated with this TMS server that you configured on the previous stage. On this step, whatever TMS you configured here, it'll get associated to this particular cluster and this particular CMS. So this is required so that you can properly see the meeting schedule for all these servers. Okay. Now the final thing is setting up a TMS phone book for the CMM. You need to do this so that for an existing CMM conference, let's say there is an active conference which is running on the CMS server, which you are managing from the CMM. If you want to add a participant, and if that participant is actually a part of the TMS phone book, if you want to use that directly, you will need to follow these steps so that phone book is available for the CMM. So what you can do is you can navigate to CMM, CMM settings, TMS, and copy the MAC address. So if you remember, this is where we initially added the TMS server itself. But if you scroll to the bottom of this page, you should be able to see the MAC address. Right? There's a MAC address there which you need to copy and you need to apply it on the TMS server. Right? So the next step is to go to the TMS. You can go to phone book, and inside the phone book, there is a phone book for Cisco meeting management, specifically for CMM. We basically need to add a new entry there. We can enter a name for the CMM. This name really does not matter. It can be anything so that it will logically make sense to you that we are talking about this particular CMM. You add in the MAC address that you copied from step 1, and you can click on save. Right? So once you click on save, you should get an entry for your CMM on which you can basically select or move the phone books which you want to be managed by the CMM from left to right. You will have columns there. You can basically move it from left to right and click on save. Once this is done, you need to go back to CMM on the same page on CMM settings, TMS, and you need to check the use TMS phone book option so that the CMM is capable of using the TMS phone book. Right. So one important note that you should be aware of is just making CMM use this TMS phone book does not guarantee that the CMS will be able to dial out to that participant. Right. So if you need that dialing out to work appropriately, you might need to add some additional outbound rules on the Cisco meeting server. Right. We will be trying to dial out to those participants based on what we get from the TMS phone book. So it is possible that your CMS server does not have that corresponding outbound rule. So if it's not there, you will need to configure it. So this is how once you add your Cisco, once you add your phone book for your CMM, you can basically move your available phone books to the right side. You can click on save and it should be available. Right. You can see the MAC address which I copied from the Cisco meeting management settings TMS page, which basically I copied it from here and I added it here. Right. The final thing you had to do was check this TMS phone book. This is actually basic. This screenshot is from the CMM settings page inside the TMS page, TMS support. Okay. With that, we should be able to now use the TMS phone book on the CMM when adding a new participant. Always keep in mind to add that outbound rule if it is required. Okay. With that, we have covered the TMS CMM integration as well. So the final section that we have is CMS troubleshooting. Okay. So what we will be covering here is basic CMS troubleshooting. What are the logs that you might be looking into, what you should be looking into, what logs should we actually collect for certain scenarios, right? And where can we find these logs, right? Maybe perhaps some basic idea on how to troubleshoot the Cisco meeting server. And let's say if you're working with Cisco TAG, these are some of the information that you should be aware so that you can at least look into the right information or gather the right information for TAG, right? So the first basic troubleshooting commands that are available on the Cisco meeting server is you have the traditional ping, traceroute, and DNS lookup commands. Right? With ping, it is pretty straightforward. You can basically try and ping an FQDN or an IP address to see if the connectivity is going through or not. Right? It gives you can directly log into the CLI or the MMP and type in the ping command, and you should be able to get a response. Right? If it is going well, you will get the response here. Otherwise, you will just see packets lost or packets dropped, and you should be able to see a failed transmission here. Right? Same thing goes with traceroute. Linux commands, right? You can do a traceroute, and you can put in the FQDN or the IP address so that you can see the layer 3 routing on how the CMS is actually reaching the corresponding destination. Right? In this example, I'm trying to trace route to cucm.tp.tp.com, which is basically in the same subnet. That's why I'm only getting one entry here. So depending on how it is actually, the L3 routing is actually done, you should be able to get the route here. Right? So this might help you in troubleshooting issues where there might be some sort of asymmetric routing and you might need to track it using this. Then you have your DNS lookup commands, which will basically return the IP address or the FQDN depending on what you're looking at. Right? So you have DNS lookup for A record or your AA records for your IPv6, and you have your SRV record lookups. So basically you have all these different commands available for DNS lookup, right? You can pretty much type DNS lookup SRV and type in an SRV record. For instance, _xmpp-client.tcp and the domain. You just want to see if the CMS server is able to resolve this FQDN, you can just type in DNS lookup A and the FQDN, whatever you're trying to resolve. Okay. Now, let's look at some of the troubleshooting tools which are available already on the CMS server. Right. The first one is the web admin logs. Right. The web admin logs is basically from your web admin. So if you do not have web admin enabled on one of the servers for some reason, then you do not have a handle on this, right? There's no way you can have a look at the web admin logs. Excuse me. Then you have the SFTP files. So there is a list of SFTP files which you can use to gather some information about the server, right? These SFTP files basically help you identify some of the problems, or you can look into certain files like certificates or the private keys of the corresponding certificates, etc. Then you have something called log bundle, which is again an SFTP based file which you can collect for analysis. We'll look a little deeper into it in the coming slides. And finally, you have the packet captures, right? There is a pcap command on the server which you can initiate, which you can run, which will initiate a packet capture collection. And once you press Control C, the captures will stop, and you can later copy that file again from the Cisco meeting server and take a look at it to identify, let's say, some sort of one-way audio issue or some sort of TLS negotiation problems. Well, let's look into each of them a little bit more detailed. The first thing is the web admin logs, right? So when it comes to web admin, there are primarily two things which you can do for, let's say, analysis, right? One is the system status page that you have here on the top right, right? The system status page gives you some sort of overview on what the current status is, what the current version is, what is the uptime, whether XMPP is connected or not, provided it's an older version, right? In 3.0, you're not going to see this, but yes. Now, that is the system status section, right? Then you have the fault condition section. So these fault condition sections are pretty much like your alarms, where the CMS server has identified some sort of problem in your configuration or some sort of network related problem, let's say some sort of DNS lookup which is failing, right? So all those will actually trigger an alarm on the Cisco meeting server internally, which you will be able to see in the fault conditions. For instance, here it is actually complaining about web bridge connection to some FQDN is failed because of DNS failure, right? So there is a DNS lookup which actually failed for this particular FQDN, due to which we were not able to connect to the web bridge. Web bridge is your web app component, right? Which actually helps with the web app component. And you also have your recent errors and warnings in the same page. If you scroll down, you should be able to see the recent alarms and warnings. So this is not a complete log set. It is just the warnings. Any log levels which is hitting this warning level or error level should be printed here. And it does not conclusively tell you why it failed. It is just certain warnings that the CMS has detected and is giving you a heads up on these things. And in no means is this a exhaustive list or a complete list to look in and fix a problem. Logs, event logs, and you should be able to see a basic set of logs here. Right? Once again, while it has a lot of information, this is definitely not conclusive. Right? It still does not print everything that is getting printed into the syslog. It is, let's say, call it like a subset of your syslog. It will have certain information which might give you a lot of idea on what the problem might be. But if you need something more detailed, or if you need all the log levels or all the log lines which the CMS is printing, this is not the ideal scenario for you, or this is not the ideal way for you. You will need to get the syslog for that. But this is like a neat tool that if you want to quickly check something, you can always go to logs and event logs, and you can see the recent logging, whatever has happened. Right? And if you enable detailed tracing, it will show up in this page also. Right? If you enable detailed tracing, it will show up on this page. That does not mean it is going to print everything. It will still not print certain information which will only be there on the syslog. But yes, detailed tracing, let's say you enable SIP tracing, you will be able to see the SIP messages here in this page. Okay. Now let's look at the detailed tracing as well. Again, on the web admin, you can go to logs, detailed tracing, and pretty much set any of these services. There is actually more. The screenshot is not covering the entire thing, but there are more processes which are available here, which you can set to debug or trace. Right? So you can go to logs and detailed tracing and set one of these components, one or more of these components to debug for a certain amount of time. Right? So for instance, if you want to track, let's say, SIP message, you can actually come here, go to detailed tracing and click on this enable for 10 minutes. So what this means is, if you click on enable for 10 minutes, the SIP tracing will run for 10 minutes, after which it will automatically stop. It will go back to the info level. If you set it for 30 minutes, it's going to run for 30 minutes, and after which it is going to go back to info level. Right? So you have all these 1 minute, 10 minute, 30 minute, 24 hours. And if you want to manually disable it, let's say you clicked on enable for 30 minutes, but you got your issue reproduced in, let's say, under 5 minutes. Right? You don't want this to be running for another 25 minutes. So we can go ahead and click on disable, so we can manually disable the logging here. The timers are just there so that you do not accidentally run it forever, creating other problems on the server. Right? The other thing that you should be, the ideal way to gather these logs would be something like, let's say it is a SIP-based problem, right? Consider a scenario where you have an endpoint, let's say registered to CUCM, and is calling into your Cisco meeting server to connect to a conference, right? So if for such a conference, the endpoint will dial out and it will connect to CUCM, and through a SIP trunk, the call should land on CMS server. So let's assume that this call does not even get connected, right? And all we have is access to the CMS server, let's assume, right? In such scenario, what you can do is you can enable the SIP tracing for 10 minutes. You can make that test call, and once that call fails, which is going to be immediate, you can click on disable, and then you can collect the logs from the CMS server. And you can basically validate it and see if the call even hit our Cisco server or not. So that's the way you would ideally want to capture the logs. You should not be running it for 24 minutes, 24 hours and leaving it there. And the other important factor here is you should not be enabling logging. If, let's say, you do not know which tracing you should enable, you should not be randomly enabling all of them so that everything will get printed. And this actually makes things more difficult for the person actually reading the logs. It prints a lot of information, and it becomes really difficult for anybody looking into these logs to track out the problem. So make sure you only enable what is required, right? So anything having to do with SIP calls, right? Any incoming call, outgoing call, forwarded call, all of those things you might want to enable SIP tracing. Right? Along with that, I would also recommend enabling DNS tracing if there is some sort of forwarding, right? If call hits the CMS and if it is supposed to stay there, you probably might not need DNS tracing. But if it is a call which is supposed to be forwarded, let's say to Skype or a third party, and maybe to Expressway, in such scenarios, you might need DNS tracing so that we can see if the proxy FQDNs were resolvable, right? So if you do not have this DNS tracing, you might not know that. So depending on the scenario, you might need to add one or more debug tracing, but never everything together, right? That is not helpful. And API tracing for any calls, let's say a call is getting scheduled from the TMS or a call is getting initiated from the CMM. All of them are HTTPS API commands, which will hit the CMS server, right? So you might need to get the API tracing as well. So in a TMS example, a TMS will basically send an API input to the CMS stating that it needs to call out to certain endpoints, right? In that example, you need API tracing so that you can confirm the TMS is sending the correct information. More often than not, it will be sending information, but it is always good to have that, right? Along with that, you can also get the SIP tracing so that you can see if the CMS is properly dialing out for those SIP calls. Right, so that's how you can actually bundle the log collection depending on how or what the scenario is. Right, web bridge tracing is for your web app. Right, you can get web app tracing enabled here. You can always have a trace parameter added on the join URL as well, as explained yesterday. But this is another way we can actually get detailed information on the web bridge component on the CMS. Then you have tip for your older CTS based endpoints. If you're communicating with that, you might need this. Then you have active control, right, for your layouts and the meeting controls, etc. Then there's a lot more. You have ICE tracing, BFCP. So each of them have their own own need. So depending on your scenario, you will have to enable the appropriate logs. Okay. Now the SFTP files. So you have the ability to connect to the Cisco meeting server using an SFTP application. For instance, you can use a FileZilla, or you can use an application called WinSCP. So you can use these applications to connect to the Cisco meeting server and view these different files which are available there on the Cisco meeting server. Whether it's for an upgrade procedure or for some sort of troubleshooting or restoring to an older backup, all these things will need SFTP access. Troubleshooting is just one among the uses for connecting using SFTP. Right, so let's take a look at what all is available when you connect to SFTP. You have the certificate files, right, which perhaps is being used by one or more components in the CMS server. You might also have other certificates which you are not using anymore, right, which if it is not being used can be removed. You will have the corresponding private keys for those certificates. For in this example, you have this callbridge.crt, which is your certificate file, and you have this callbridge.key, which is the corresponding private key. Right? So most likely this is going to be the callbridge component certificate and the corresponding private key. Right. One thing which is not listed here is the cms.lic file. This will be your license file. So which will be missing on your newer 3.0 deployments, right? If you're using smart licensing. Then you have your live.json file. So this is basically a JSON object file, which will have the current running configuration of the CMS server, right? So whatever you configure from the MMP, that is your CLI, where you enable a component like callbridge or enable webbridge, the IP addresses, static routes, all that information will be there on the live.json. Right? So it's a quick way to, let's say, validate the server configuration. Right? It'll also have the information like version that the CMS is running, the hardware on which it is running. So it'll have a lot of key information that you can use if you have this live.json. Then you have the backup file, which is actually not there on this list here, but backup file is something that you can actually generate by running a command on the MMP. So running that command will actually generate that backup file. It will have the format .bak or extension .bak. And this backup file, you can actually copy it to your secure machine or your laptop, so that in case the server crashes or there is a scenario where you actually need to restore, you can use that backup file to restore the server. Then you have the audit logs, which will log events like user access or user permission requests. Anything related to user access, which should probably get logged into the audit log. For instance, let's say I copy this file cms.lic from the CMS server to my laptop. Right? That should get logged into this audit log. Or I copy a new certificate, web.crt, into the CMS server. That should also get logged into the audit log. Right? Basically, it audits the access to the Cisco meeting server or the actions on the Cisco meeting server. Then you have this log file, which is your actual syslog, right? So this is the log file which will actually have all the information, right? But whether you should collect or just copy this log file, we will see in the next slide, right? So this is the actual syslog, or this is the log which will have a lot of information. And if we copy this over, we should be able to look into this and hopefully try and identify what the problem is. But whether we should collect it, we'll get that answer in the next slide. Right? Then you will have crash dumps, right? Hopefully you do not have this, but if you see this crash dump file, this means some process or some component on your Cisco meeting server crashed, right? And that crash actually creates some sort of dump, so that you can actually look into that crash dump and identify why that happened and hopefully fix it so that it does not happen again. Right? So it's some sort of Linux processes. When it crashes, it's going to create some sort of crash dump which you can analyze. And finally, you have your PCAP files. Right? So if you initiate a PCAP from the CLI and later stop it, you should be able to see that PCAP file as you're seeing it here on the CMS server. Right? You can basically copy this over and open it in a Wireshark and analyze it. Right? Now, what is log bundle? Right? We saw this in the previous slide also. We had this log bundle just next to the log, but we didn't talk about it. Right? So this is the reason we ideally would not want to collect this log file. Right? From version 2.2 and onwards, we have something called this log bundle.tar.gc. Right? If you see, the file size is actually showing 1 KB. That is because it's not a static file, rather it's a dynamic file which gets generated when you actually try to access it. So this log bundle file, when you try to copy it to your PC or your laptop, it will actually gather a lot of information from the server. It will bundle it together, archive it, and then copy it to your PC, right? So when you copy this, it actually gets the log, which is your syslog. It'll get the crash dumps, the database, the live.json, and some other files also, right? So instead of individually taking the individual files like the live.json or the log or the crash dumps individually, you can just copy this log bundle.tar file, which will actually collect it on your behalf. Right? So it might take a while because this is actually happening on the go when you actually try to copy it. So it may take few seconds for it to completely generate all that information and then copy it over. Okay. So if you are ever collecting logs, let's say you've reproduced some problem, let's say some sort of SIP issue, you should always be collecting the log bundle rather than the individual log file or the live.json. You just collect this and it should automatically bundle whatever is required. Unless and until Cisco tag or the BU specifically tells you we need this information, this log bundle is sufficient. Okay. Moving on. Okay. Packet capture is something which we have already discussed. You can just run the command pcap space and interface name, and it will start capturing the packets on that particular interface. Right? But how do you choose which interface to take packet captures from? Right? For instance, if it is for a call bridge, let's say there is a call drop problem, right? And you think it has something to do with the TLS handshake when it is happening between CUCM and the CMS server, right? So let's assume the TLS handshake between CUCM and the call bridge is failing, and you want to take packet captures for that particular section, right? So you can actually type in the command call bridge, and it will show you which interface the call bridge is actually listening on. So you can pick that interface from there and go back to the CLI and type in pcap space that particular interface, right? And it will start capturing packets on it. And then you can reproduce the issue. Once you reproduce the issue, you can press Ctrl C to stop it and go back to the SFTP, connect to the CMS using SFTP, copy over the packet capture file. And hopefully you should be able to see that TLS handshake happening and hopefully fix that problem. Right? And in the newer version, to add on, from 3.1, this command has been given additional features. You can actually, instead of a single interface, you can actually collect packets from multiple interfaces. You can even pass on certain filters so that it captures packets only based on that filter, right? There has been a lot of capability that has been added to this particular command from 3.1 CMS. Okay. Now let's look at some of the commands which we have actually explored before, but we didn't actually look at the actual specific commands, right? So how do you actually take a backup, right? The command you can actually run on the MMP is backup space snapshot and a file name. So this is a random name that you can choose. Hopefully this is something, whatever you put in as the file name would logically make sense to you, so that in case is some sort of server crash or something, you will be able to relate to it that it is this backup file that using which I should restore, right? So best to put in some details like the date or the year and some information like that, so that it makes more sense later when you look at those files, right? So the command is backup snapshot and the file name. Now this will just create that file and put it on the CMS server, right? You can type in the backup space list command to see that file getting generated. So this does not mean the CMS server is backed up. This is still inside the CMS server. So if you just leave it there and the server crashes again, right? So you have to connect using SFTP and copy this file to a secure location, or let's say your PC, so that if something happens to the server, you can always revert back, right? So once you generate it, you should copy this file outside, right, to a secure SFTP or something. Now, if you want to restore, let's say the server crashed, you installed a new CMS server and you are now trying to restore it. So for restoring, you can run the command backup, rollback, and the file name. So before you run this command, you obviously need to copy that file from your SFTP into your CMS server using some SFTP tool like FileZilla or WinSCP, and then you can run this command, right? And then you can do a reboot so that the changes take effect, right? Moving on, upgrading, right? So the upgrade list command actually shows the different upgrade image files that are available on this Cisco meeting server. So how do we usually upgrade? We actually get an upgrade image. We will download it from cisco.com and we will copy it onto our Cisco meeting server and we will run the command upgrade, right? When we just run the command upgrade, the CMS actually looks for a file name upgrade.img, right? And it will try to upgrade to that version, upgrade or downgrade, right? Whether depending on what is actually inside that version, it will upgrade or downgrade to that corresponding version. If you just run the command upgrade, right? If you type in upgrade space list, it will actually show all the different upgrade images which are there on the Cisco meeting server. Let's say you have more than one upgrade image. Let's say you have upgrade.img and you have upgrade1.img, right? And if you want to use upgrade1.img, you can actually specify it here when you type in this command. You can type in upgrade space and the file name upgrade1.img. You also have additional options to disable automatic backup. So what happens is when you type in upgrade and press enter, before the upgrade process, it automatically initiates a backup, right? It'll actually initiate a backup and it gets generated and it gets copied onto the CMS server. But if you want to disable this process, there is an additional parameter that you can pass in along with this command so that it does not get generated. Moving on, just some more details on the live.json and the backup files, right? Something which we have already explored, but just to reiterate, the live.json file basically has your MMP configuration, right? It is your live active CMS server configuration, which will be present on the JSON file, on the live.json file. It does not include any configurations that you put from the web admin or using the API, right? All that information would go into the database. The live.json will just have the MMP based configuration. Now, what does the backup file have, right? As I mentioned, the backup file will have the extension .bak, right? So the backup file is basically a combination of this live.json as well as all the other configurations, let's say the database, right? But you cannot actually make any changes to this backup file. You can actually open it and some portion of that backup file is actually readable. You can actually see some portions of it, but you are not supposed to make any changes to it, right? Making any changes to it means that you will not be able to later upload it or restore it using that particular file, right? So you can see some part of it, but you shouldn't be changing anything on it. If you want to look at the live, the MMP configuration, live.json is the way to go. Or you can actually, if the server is active, you can connect to the MMP and run your commands to validate the configuration. Okay. The debug files. Okay. In CMS, you have this additional capability to create a debug file. You can run the command on the MMP debug space a file name. It should actually trigger the Cisco meeting server to capture a lot of information from the underlying operating system, right? The CMS admin CLI that you see is actually built on top of an operating system, right? Now, when you run this command, the Cisco meeting server basically gets a lot of information from that operating system. For instance, the CPU usage, the memory usage, you will have the disk usage, the database information, the process list, the PS process list will be collected, any active TCP UDP connections, all that information will be gathered from the underlying operating system, and the CMS will dump it into a single file in a specific order. Right? So all that information will be collected from the underlying OS and it will be kept on certain file. Right? So this will come in handy. Once again, this file needs to be copied manually from the CMS using an SFTP, right? At least in the older versions, right? So this file actually comes in handy if you're dealing with issues where, let's say your CMS is very slow and the CPU utilization is going high, or there is some sort of memory leak which is happening, right? Some sort of crashes where you can actually kernel logs, right? The Linux-based logs, so that you can identify why that crash happened. It gives more insight into the operating system of the particular box, right? Of the particular Cisco meeting server. On the newer versions, you do not necessarily have to run this command and manually copy this over, because when you copy that log bundle.tar.gc, which we explain later, which would actually gather a lot of information when you try to copy it, it will actually do this debug as well, and you should be able to see that system information as well when you copy or extract that log bundle.tar.gc. Right? So log bundle.tar.gc will collect the debug file as well. It should help you with information like the process list, CPU usage, memory usage, and everything like this. Okay. And if you're not collecting the log bundle, you can always run this command and just look at the memory or the operating system level information here. Right. And as explained several times before, one of the quickest way to look into a certain problem is to do a syslog follow. Right? You can just connect to the CMS server and you can type in the command syslog follow and enter, and it will start printing the logs, whatever is happening on the Cisco meeting server at that time on your screen. Right? So you can perhaps request a user to try and log in using the web bridge and see if it is going through or not, right? If that user was complaining that the login was not working, you can basically do syslog follow and request the user to log in or join as a guest, right? And you can actually track it. This is useful if the traffic on that server is limited, right? If there is a lot of calls, let's say 50, 60 calls running at the same time, it will be very difficult to track it on a syslog follow because it'll keep printing a lot of information and it becomes very difficult to track your particular user or your particular instance in this, right? So this can be used if you want to quickly look at something, provided the volume is low and you are able to track it. Right? If there is a huge volume, it's best to reproduce the issue and copy that log bundle.tar.gc so that you can slowly extract that file and look it normally, right? Using a notepad or something. And the other option that we have to gather statistics or information about the server is using API, right? Obviously, we have not shown the entire API, all the possible API commands that you can use to get the statistics or the status of the server, because there is a lot of them. You can basically get those details from the API reference guide, which was shared on the previous section, right? You should be able to see a lot of APIs using which you can do get commands, and you should be able to get information about the server status, right? And not just the server status, you can even get information about a particular call or a particular participant in that conference call, right? And you can, let's say a particular user complains that there is some sort of static or the audio video quality is not great for that particular user, right? You can even have API post command so that we actually make the Cisco meeting server create a diagnostics for that particular user, and it will collect it and keep it on the Cisco meeting server. And the administrator can later go and download that file and validate what is happening. So there are a lot of APIs which is available for diagnostics as well. Right? The one last thing that we have to discuss is the syslog server. Right? So it is recommended to use a syslog server to dump the logs from your Cisco meeting server if you have a multi-server deployment, right? If you have a deployment where you have 4 or 6 Cisco meeting server or more, it's best to use a syslog server so that you can point your CMS server logs to a single entity, right? It gives you multiple advantages when you use this. The primary advantage is that the monitoring of these servers becomes simple, right? You can have certain monitoring applied based on these logs so that you can look at these specific servers and see what is happening, right? It also helps with troubleshooting because consider a scenario where you have 6 servers, right? And a particular user A, called into one of the meetings and the call got disconnected. So if you want to troubleshoot this without anything else, you will actually have to get the logs from all 6 servers perhaps, and we have to identify where that call actually landed first of all, right? We wouldn't even know where that call actually landed. First we have to find that, and then we can try and identify what actually happened, right? So having a single point where all these syslogs are dumped will actually help navigate all these problems. So it's just a recommendation to have a syslog so that the CMS sends all this syslog logging, all these logging to one single entity. So even if you enable some detailed tracing, even that information will be sent to the syslog server. So we have seen customers use syslog servers like Splunk, which not just logs them, it gives you a lot of additional ability, like you can track certain events, and based on which it can even raise alarms to the administrators. So it gives you a lot of additional functionality, and you do not necessarily have to rely on the alarms which the CMS server generates, right? And it becomes difficult to manage as well if you have to go to individual CMS servers and see what is happening. So how do we do this? You can just type in, once you are in the CMS MMP, you can type in syslog server and the IP address of the syslog server and the corresponding port, right? The IP address is the IP address of the syslog server, and the port is the port on which your syslog server is listening on. So this will be a TCP port on which the syslog is listening on. Right? This is because CMS uses TCP for sending the syslog information. All right. You can also have not just a syslog, you can also have the audit logs to be sent to the syslog server. With that, we are at the end of the session. I think we are good. And if you have any questions, feel free to post it on the Q&A, and we'll try our best to answer all the queries there. Thank you.
Thank you, Sharan. Okay, everyone, we've finished the sessions. If you have any questions going forward, we have all the panelists available to answer your questions. Just raise your hand and we'll unmute you so that you can speak out your question. Thank you.